Hey there, Kelly. Hope you're doing great. Just going to make a quick video here to give you some feedback on your latest AP practice essay. This was the 2005 prose prompt. It was over McTeague, the unsanitary dentist, the guy who had ambitions of being a big dentist someday, um, but who kind of doesn't seem to understand how to be a proper dentist. The prompt asked you to talk about how McTeague is characterized and how that characterization reflects the narrator's attitude towards McTeague. And I believe it asked you to consider tone, syntax, diction, and selection of detail. Okay, since this is the first one of these videos that I've made, I'll go ahead and give you the rundown on how these work. I start these videos with what I feel like the essay does really well, and I talk about that for a little bit, and then I transition into weak points in the essay or things that I see in your writing that you'll want to address or strengthen as you continue to become a better writer and a better thinker. And then finally, I give you an estimated score, what I think this would get on that 1 to 9 scale on the AP exam, and I try and explain why I feel that that score is justified, and if it's lower than the upper third, what keeps it out of there, and if it's scored high, why I feel like it scores high. Okay, so oh, one other thing before I get started. I try to make these videos as quickly as possible, so I may speak kind of quickly. If I gloss over something and don't explain it fully, I apologize in advance. But if you need additional help, if nothing in this video seems clear or any of my comments on the video seem clear, just come up to me in class and we'll go over it together. Or you can come if you're available to meet with me during my planning fourth block. We can go over it then as well. Okay, without any further ado, now that the formalities are out of the way, let's get started. I'll start with the things that I feel like the essay does really well. There's plenty to like in here. Number one, I feel like your essay delves into the complexity of the character and of the narrator's attitude. I particularly like the take that the narrator both sympathizes with McTeague and feels superior to McTeague. That's a nice way of phrasing it, and I'm persuaded by that claim. I feel like there's ample evidence in the text to support that interpretation. So you do a good job, I think, of dealing with complexity and making a claim that seems consistent with the text. So good job on that, because that's tricky. It's really tricky for people to talk about complexity when they haven't had a lot of practice doing it yet. I feel like you do that well. I do feel like your intro paragraph has an excellent hook to it. Um, uh, there's a number of intros that I've read that just you guys are really good at writing introductory paragraphs, which is awesome because those are kind of difficult to teach from my perspective. But you have a great hook here. Have you ever had a dentist extract one of your molars with their bare hands? In this piece, a dentist is known for just that absurd act. So you have a phenomenal hook there that really grabs the reader's attention, and your thesis does a good job of answering the prompt. There is one thing I would want to tweak about it, but we'll get to that section in a few moments. But for the most part, I do feel like your thesis does answer the prompt, so good job on that. I feel like you follow slice format well. You do a good job of providing a topic sentence, then providing evidence, then providing analysis of that evidence. You have some very thoughtful reasoning in here. I've highlighted all the instances where I feel like you've got some pretty solid analysis. You do talk about, for example, if he does not even have the money to be able to support himself in a proper house or apartment and has to buy used furniture for his new office, then he does not need to spend the money for the unnecessary expense. So you do a good job of kind of analyzing the foolishness of McTeague's character. So good job on that. You've got some more astute analysis. I'll let you read through there and see what you think. And then as far as the length of the essay, I feel like you do a great job, again, of really delving in depth into the prompt. I don't feel like the essay is half baked. I don't feel like there are threads um, where I never felt like there were paragraphs that were just underdeveloped, right? Where it seemed like you had a good idea, but then you just only wrote, 2 sentences about it. I never got that sense from your essay, which is good. That might change once we start writing these under, the time constraints of 40 minutes. But for now, you do a great job of crafting a complete essay, an essay that feels complete, right? Okay, good job on all those. You have some excellent word choice in here too. I've highlighted those as well. Keep up all the good work. And yeah, so now we'll transition into things that the essay that I've noticed going on in your writing, or things that the essay doesn't do quite as well, or things that we want to tweak or revise. You'll notice I have these numbers here by your by certain sections of your text. By the time you get this video, you should have the paper in front of you that explains what those mean. I won't go into every one of them, but the main one that I'm going to go into is 18 because I noticed it a couple of times in your paper, and I'm noticing this crop up in a lot of people's papers, which I'm used to. This is something that many writers your age struggle with. Struggle with is kind of the wrong word here. Okay, so 18 is passive voice. I think I'm going to teach a more in-depth lesson on what passive voice is in class, so I won't go into it in this video. But suffice it to say, passive voice is not a it's not something that you would never use. There are times when the passive voice is called for, but as a general rule of thumb, it is good to avoid passive voice when you can. And the reason why is passive voice makes your writing longer than it needs to be. 2, 3 words longer than it needs to be. You can always say something in the active voice in fewer words than in the passive voice. And again, if you have 1 or 2 sentences, right, that have passive voice, it's not a big deal. If you're using passive voice for effect, and again, we'll talk more about that later on in the semester, Holden Caulfield uses passive voice strategically a lot in Catcher in the Rye. But generally speaking, you want to avoid passive voice because it makes your writing wordier than it needs to be, more bloated than it needs to be, and over time that adds up. So again, if a sentence is 1 word longer than it needs to be, probably no big deal. But over time, right, if each sentence in your essay is 1 word longer than it needs to be, you're going to have an essay that feels clunky and awkward and not as lean and refined as it needs to. So a good example here, for example, McTeague is presented as ambitious because he started his own business, right? McTeague is presented as ambitious. You can McTeague is presented as ambitious. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. You can change that to the author presents McTeague as ambitious, and it's a more forceful way of saying it. It just like I don't know a better way to phrase it. It just sounds better. It makes your writing feel more active, right? Um, and it makes it feel less awkward. The author presents McTeague as ambitious by noting that he started his own business and dreams of putting up a glorious tooth outside his office to attract the eyes of the townspeople. So you have a really long sentence here, right? Or a fairly long. It's not terribly long, but there are several phrases in there that we can cut away or we can rework and make it shorter and leaner. And when you make your writing more concise, you make it by default more coherent. It's easier to understand writing that is in the active voice and only says what it needs to and not much more. If you use more words than you need in your sentence, the meaning of what you're trying to get across to your audience actually gets clouded by all the words and awkward phrases that you're using. So I've highlighted a few instances here of passive voice. I've also highlighted areas where the language is awkward, so it's not necessarily passive voice. But if we look at this sentence here, for instance, the diction employed to describe McTeague, well, that is passive voice, right? The diction employed to describe McTeague, we could rephrase that to the diction that the author employs about McTeague has negative connotations that imply a sense of superiority. Now, what's confusing about this sentence is this phrase here. Negative connotations that imply a sense of superiority. The word choice is on point there. You've got some really good words in there. The problem is, read the sentence carefully. The diction employed to describe McTeague has negative connotations that imply a sense of superiority. I think you're trying to explain that the narrator feels superior. I think that's what you're going for. But the way the sentence is worded, read it carefully, it makes it sound like McTeague has a sense of superiority because the diction employed about McTeague can imply a sense of superiority on McTeague's part. and that's not what you're trying to say. So this is where the problems of awkward wording come home to roost, because it then becomes unclear what exactly you're trying to prove to your audience. Are you trying to prove to me that McTeague is superior, or are you trying to prove to me that the author, or excuse me, the narrator feels superior to McTeague? Those are two different claims, so you want to be specific about your language. Okay, I feel like I've rambled on enough about that, but that's the main thing that I see going on. So I want to make sure that you really kind of understand what I mean when I say awkward wording. And again, if it's still unclear, then I will be happy to help you in class. Just ask me for help as you revise. I had other things in here, but they're very, very small, so I'm not going to worry about them in this video. All right, I've estimated your score as a 5. I feel like you have analysis in here, and you have some thoughtful and astute analysis, which I've highlighted. So anytime you've got analysis that seems like it answers the prompt, I feel like that gets you to a 5 automatically. A couple things that hold it back from that upper third of scoring. Obviously, the awkward word choice and the passive voice that I was talking about. A couple of other things. Your thesis here is a little vaguer or more vague. It's a little too vague. Let's just go with that. You talk about the narrator's sympathetic yet superior attitude. Again, kudos for complexity. But then you have this kind of phrase tacked on at the end, achieved by the use of literary devices. And it was never clear to me until late in your essay what literary devices you were going with. So you talk about characterization here, and you talk about details, but I never knew if you were talking about, I guess you're talking about selection of detail here, but you never really specify what literary devices you want to talk about until here, which is about halfway through your paper. Literary devices such as diction, tone, selection of detail, and syntax operate together to formulate the narrator's sympathetic yet superior attitude. I feel like this belongs further up in your thesis, just because I get nervous when I read a thesis like this, when it feels like the author of the essay doesn't quite know what literary devices they're going to talk about. And so try not to convey uncertainty to your reader. So I feel like your thesis could be strengthened there. And then the other thing that I feel keeps it from being in that upper area was your portion on syntax. The syntax, this is a good start, but I'm going to caution you not to write about syntax until we've actually gone over it in class. It's kind of a difficult thing to write about or to analyze if you're not ready for it. And I've had a lot of people that attempted it and just kind of they're analyzing the wrong things here. I feel like this is a good start, but it feels underdeveloped to me. And I feel like the reason that you wrote about it is because you had all those 4 given in the prompt, and you felt like you had to write about all 4 of those. So advice for the future ones, or for the future essays, don't feel like you have to write about every single one. If they give you 4 and you write about 2 compellingly, that's enough. If they give you 4 and you can find 1, but then you can find some other ones that they didn't list, go for it. Right? Don't feel you need to answer the prompt, but you don't necessarily need to use all of the literary devices that they give you. Now, I would say you need to use some of them, but don't feel compelled to write about them all, especially if you're not comfortable writing about syntax quite yet. We're going to go over that later in the semester, so no worries about that. As far as the scoring goes, this is about where I expect most people to be at this point in the semester. I expect them to be kind of in the 3 to 4 range. The fact that you're in the 5 range is a good sign. What keeps it again from being in those upper third is all the stuff that I've listed here, and you're going to have time to go over this in class and try and revise it to where I feel like we get it to a 6 pretty easily. So you'll have time to do that. But yeah, do not if you're upset about your score, please don't be. This is an excellent starting point, especially for an essay in which this was your first solo attempt at it. So you're right where I need you to be. We just need to focus on that awkward word choice and making sure that we're saying things as clearly and concisely as possible. And then I expect your score to rise steadily as the semester goes on. Okay, I've rambled on long enough. This video is way longer than I intended it to be. Apologies for that. If you have any questions, come find me in class. Hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in class very soon.